What's up, Ego Hackers? Welcome to Season 18, Cognitive Mechanics. And today we're going to be discussing what is cognitive development from the perspective of the Octagram. We haven't really put down much for the foundation of the Octagram to date. So we're going to be remedying that situation today since we went through last month, understanding input, process, output, feedback, and how that affects the entire science. And today we're just putting together the basic building blocks of what the Octagram is. Next month we'll be discussing cognitive focus and how it's a building block as well. And then we will be discussing the octagrid to a point after the fact. So pretty basic stuff for the most part, and hopefully we get the opportunity to see the trusty whiteboard today and have another opportunity. Wow, that made things very white all of a sudden. So let's remove that for a minute here. So yeah, being able to have the opportunity to talk about these things is pretty awesome. So cognitive development within the context of the Octagram represents one's internal life experience, basically everything that they have experienced in life, and that includes their own personal decisions for their own life and decisions that other people have made that have directly affected them as well as indirectly affected them. But it's still affectation. This affectation makes up a person's cognitive development. And from the perspective, yeah, that's right. I am on my regular schedule of being 10 minutes late. Thank you very much for that. I guess I deserve that. I'm sure Fib is snickering pretty well for that statement. Yeah. So let me see here. Let's take a look at what this has here. Great. And we're going to turn on my whiteboard to be able to have an opportunity to look at that. I have a little bit of a fuzzy screen with me, but not really much I can do about that. So yeah, but let's actually do a little bit of a visual diagram of some kind where we can really discuss that at length. So cognitive development, and oftentimes, Chris Taylor has talked about cognitive development being the great SI, right? Whereas cognitive focus is the great NI. It's like, so what does that mean? That means, this is where someone has been. Okay, this is also somebody's life experience. But it's actually more than just life experience at any one given time. It really actually is total life experience. Definitely total life experience. So cognitive development is basically, one's total life experience. And okay, yes, thank you, Chris, for snickering too. That's fantastic. So let's actually put down a timeline of somebody's life here. So we'll represent it in blue, right? So, okay. And let's just say 80%. Okay. And then we're going to let's do red. This will be 20%. Ooh, a Pareto. And then we have person's octagram. Okay. So this person is born. Great. And then they have, childhood. Adolescence, young adulthood, adulthood, and so on and so forth. But the introverted sensing piece represents ultimately the first 80%, whereas, obviously cognitive focus would be the other 20%. But this really is basically what your cognitive development is. It is your total life experience, right? And if you think about it from a cognitive development perspective, why is it a child, children, and I'm going to say this here, so children have the ability to easily change their cognitive development during childhood. It's extremely easy. Well, why is that? This is there's a type of phenomenon a little bit that needs to be considered when you're thinking about like children to a point. And that phenomenon basically is that, okay, why is it that as you get older, time passes faster? Time passes you by much faster when you're older. Why? Have any of you guys noticed that? I remember when I was a little kid that like summertime right after the school year felt like an eternity. It was an absolute eternity, summertime. And then school was even longer eternity, but at least summertime was such an eternity that it felt so satisfying. And I felt so rested and prepared and ready to go back to school because summertime was so long and so enjoyable and so excellent, right? Well, as you get older, your perception of time changes. And this means that, so for example, let's imagine, like the size of your brain, right? So we're gonna make a brain here, okay? One brain. Okay. Most of the people are like, Chase, looks like a heart, just so you know. Thanks. Thank you for your amazing criticism. We're going to make a brain here. And your brain is small, okay? And then your brain gets really big eventually, right? I got in trouble for drawing this exact same symbol when I was in kindergarten because I was accused of drawing a butt. I got in trouble for drawing a butt in kindergarten. And I got in trouble by Mrs. Buck. And that was my kindergarten teacher. Good times. So, yeah, and Robert Potts says, I maintain someone hit fast forward once I had kids. And that's literally how it goes. Hitting fast forward, this is a small brain, and then we have a big brain, so it's an adult brain. So, so this is adult, right? And then this is a child. And from the child's brain perspective, the child's brain is a lot smaller, right? So its perceptive and judgment capabilities are a lot less, which means it has a total life experience of, let's say, for me as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, having summertime after school, that was a long maternity, because if you think about it, those months, it was 3 months out of the year? What percentage of my total lifespan was actually those 3 months as a 5-year-old so if you think about it. So if I'm 5 years old, right? And my birthday is in February, and I'm 5 years old, okay? So that means 12 times 5. So I've only been around for 60 months on the planet. And then I get out of school on June 15th, right? So February 7th plus June 15th, right? So that would be March 7th, April 7th, May 7th, June 7th. So that's an additional 4 months and 1 week, plus an additional 3 total months. So that'd be 7 months and 1 week, okay? So 5 years, 7 months, and 1 week. So that is a total of 67 months and 1 week. What percentage of that 67 months as a child, as a 5-year-old, is my summertime after that first school year in kindergarten? What percentage of my lifespan? it is a very significant percentage, okay? And because it is a very significant percentage, that is why it feels like an eternity. Versus now I'm 36 years old, okay? As a 36-year-old, 3 months is not really that much of a percentage of my lifespan. It just really isn't. So from a cognitive development perspective, my total life experience, not only does it increase, but my perception of my total life experience also changes. Because what used to seem like an eternity, a 3-month long summer, and it now is just a drop in the bucket. It's just a small drop in the bucket. Whereas my bucket used to be really, really small. What little water I had in it, just one drop was a huge percentage of that little bucket. But now my life is a huge bucket with a lot of water, a lot of total life experience in it, right? So a small drop in that bucket is really going to be insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Think about if you're a person who is an eternal person, that you've lived for eternity, right? 1,000 years will just seem like a day to you, right? Right? At least that's what, things, how biblically that it says that God the Creator ends up, perceiving the world and perceiving reality among us or around us, is because literally from that perspective, like, it's just a drop in the bucket. One day really isn't that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, especially when you have eternal life and you are an eternal being. It just doesn't matter. Why is this relevant? Well, it's relevant because when you are a child and your bucket, your brain is small enough, and like the days that go by and the life experience that you have, especially as a 5-year-old and like that 3-month long summertime after your school year seems like an eternity to you, because that is a significant portion of your life experience. And because it's a significant portion of your life experience, this is why children can change their cognitive development very quickly when it comes to understanding their octagram. I've watched my 2-year-old change his cognitive development from SD to UD. He started out SD and he changed it to UD, consistently going back and forth between the two of them as he enters and exits fight or flight response to deal with the different stresses that he has to deal with in his life. Okay? And it is easy for him to oscillate within his cognitive development. But when you have someone who's, for example, 30 years old, 36 years old, like myself, 40 years old, 41, 42, 43 years old, that life experience is there. That cognitive development is not going to change very easily, because a drop in the bucket is not going to change the entire contents of a bucket. Like, if you're trying to dilute something in a bunch of water, the parts per million is so small with a single drop, whereas the parts per million is so much more with a single drop. When you look at a little tiny kid's little mini bucket of water, a little mini bucket of life experience, versus adult, which has this huge thing, and just do the same drop. Like maybe you're dropping iodine in there, for example. Well, the parts per million of the iodine will separate out across the entire bucket of water, and it is entirely insignificant. This is literally why adults do not change cognitive development unless they have some kind of physical trauma that harms their brain, okay? Physically harms their brain, where basically, to a point, their life experience ends up becoming erased in their brain. And because of that memory loss and that less life experience, that reduces the size of their bucket, basically, inside of their brain, due to that physical trauma that hit their brain. And that, because of the reduction in size, that means their cognitive development is more likely to have the potential to change. And they could switch from UD to SD or SD to UD. This is one of the biggest questions that people ask me all the time. Why is it that cognitive development is so hard to change? This is literally why. This is the entire point, right? That's how it goes. So, it's really, really important to understand the difference. It really comes down to your perceptions. It really comes down to the total life experience that you carry within yourselves in your brain. This is why we have the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You just can't, right? This is why. Because we have so much life experience getting in the way, right? This is why it is written, a man cannot enter the kingdom of heaven unless he is like a child, which means the man has to be willing to let go of his life experience and ultimately let go of his cognitive development in order to enter into the kingdom of heaven. That is the true meaning of that verse. That is what that means, okay? You have to be willing to let go of all of that life experience, okay? Because it's not going to have any value in the grand eternal scheme of things, okay? That's the entire point. Okay, so based on that, that's really the only way that you can get around it. Okay, so I wanted to make this distinction here before we got, as an introduction, before we actually got into the lecture. All right. So anyway, we know octagram measures the nurture, right? But a deeper analysis of the octagram reveals that every pole, for example, sin, virtue, shadow pole, aspiration pole. Some people say pole. I like to say spokes when it comes to the temple wheel. Some people say the poles. And when they say the poles, they're not referring to just the shadow pole and the aspiration pole like they should be. They're referring to also the deadly sin and the living virtue of the temple wheel. And we've discussed the temple wheels at length in season 18. Anyway, that every spoke on the wheel can be used in an extroverted or introverted way. For example, spending on others versus spending on self, right? And then this would make sense, especially like when you come to realize that, you know, people have this thing, you know, we call it like giving and receiving. This is what the team calls it. You know, there are some things in your life that you want to receive from other people, and there's some things in life that you want to give other people. And we actually talked a lot about this in let's see here. Let's see, if I could like actually erase the whole, oops, nope. Clear, cool. We're gonna clear the drawing here, okay. So let's actually look at, you know, once again, my temple wheel, right? So satisfaction, you know, it's the epic, right, in the center, right? And then we have, let's get some black in here, okay? How does Chase get satisfaction, okay? So satisfaction. So the unconscious focus is envy. I am envious of other people, okay? But then I am internally compassionate. So my compassion goes here, okay? Compassion. But we're not going to be talking about this today. We're actually going to be talking about just these down here. So we have malevolence, right? And then we have malevolence versus, my God, I can't believe I'm blanking out on this. I've only had 5 hours of sleep, so that's why it's a little bit difficult for me right now, and I kind of sound like a zombie. It's because I am a zombie. That's actually what's happening. I am being zombie-esque. Anyway, I just remembered fanaticism. Okay. All right. So you guys can kind of see this episode like somewhat as a continuation of what we've been discussing in the Cutting Edge episode for last month, which if you haven't watched it yet, you guys really need to watch that. So satisfaction. This is how I get satisfaction. But here's the thing. This represents my ENTP side. Okay, well, and this is basically my ego wheel. All right, this is my ego wheel. But then we have this thing called shadow wheel. Now we wanted to call it the super ego wheel, but I'm calling it the shadow wheel because I can, and I don't care the consequences of that. And I just don't care. I just don't give a shit. So that's what I'm going to call it. So yeah, and then so we have the cognitive origin, which we've been talking about a lot in season 18, with the cognitive origin of reverence, right? So ding, 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 ding. And we have desecration down here. desecration. And then we have egotism. Okay. And then up here, other than desecration, we have the deadly sin of vainglory. And then we have the living virtue of modesty. Okay. Cool. Great. We got those things. Now, hold on. Wait a minute. Something ain't right. So this represents cognitive focus. Okay. So these are different focus. And then here's the development. We're going to be focusing on development today more than anything else. Okay. Development today. We only have slight look at focus. Okay. All right. And then we're going to put, so envy, that is extroverted. Malevolence, that is extroverted. Fanaticism, that is introverted. Compassion, that is introverted. Vainglory, that is introverted. Modesty, that is, oops, that's wrong. Ding, 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 ding. Vainglory, that is extroverted. Desecration, that is extroverted. Egotism, that is introverted. Modesty, that is introverted. Okay, within this model. All right, so this is Chase's octagram, and all ENTPs, this is a UDUF octagram right here. This is UDUF. This is what UDUF looks like. Okay, and remember what we discussed in the last cutting edge episode. Okay, we have receiving versus giving. Okay, so let's do it this way. Let's give you guys a little bit of a key here. Okay, so extroverted equals giving. Okay, and then introverted equals receiving. Okay, receiving from others, giving to self. Okay, giving to others, and then receiving to self. That's pretty confusing. That's really confusing. Most people are like, oh my God, what the hell are we talking about here? Okay. So we're just focusing on cognitive development today. We're not going to really go there. And remember, cognitive development does not often change. I'm unconscious developed. Why am I unconscious developed? It's because I was severely disabled as a child, but because I'm UDUF, not only was I disabled as a child, I was abused as a child, and abused as an adolescent, and abused as a young adult. And then for a while, I actually healed myself, and I ended up being a UDSF person, and I'm getting closer to UDSF now due to extenuating circumstances in my life, due to new opportunities that have come up in my life. I'm starting to get a little bit more hope instead of having to deal with a despair problem. But don't forget, UDUF represents despair, okay? Whereas UDSF is hope, right? So let's actually write that down over here, okay? So we have SD, SF equals joy. And thank you, Lane, for making this very possible in knowing. Then we have decay. And then we have UD, SF people for their octagram, joy, decay. And then we have hope. These are like the Robert Downey Jr.'s of the world. And then we have Chase, who is UDUF, and that is despair. Okay, ultimately. Okay, so these are the 4 different octagrams, and these are the archetypes that impact our nature or nurture. Now remember, this is all human nurture, and this is Chase's human nurture. Okay, so if I'm extroverted with envy, and again, this is just a little bit of review, and we're probably going to do a little bit of review for this on the next episode as well, but just for review purposes, okay? So envy, that is extroverted. That means I give envy to other people, right? Primarily, I give envy to others, okay? If I'm extroverted with malevolence, that means I am primarily giving other people malevolence. But I'm introverted with compassion. which means I give myself compassion, and I love receiving compassion for other people. Why? Because something is missing, right? And then fanaticism is introverted. I have to be a fan of myself because no one was a fan of me when growing up, so I like it when other people are fans of me. This is why I cannot be in a sexual relationship with a woman unless she is both compassionate towards me and fanatic towards me, to the point of having fanatic loyalty. This is typical of every UD/UF ENTP out there. The best example of a UD/UF ENTP in popular culture is Klaus Michelson, the main protagonist character of a series called The Originals. It's a spin-off series off of Vampire Diaries that is available to watch on Netflix. Vampire Diaries also on Netflix. He starts in, I believe, season 2, episode 7 or episode 8 is when his brother first shows up, which leads to Klaus actually showing up as the villain for the show. And I believe he exits in season 4, episode 20, which is the beginning of the Originals series, basically. Okay? So, if you really want to understand intimately what an ENTP UD/UF man looks like, literally watch Klaus Michelson, because how he reacts and how he behaves is typically, it is how I would behave, especially if I didn't have any consequences for my actions. Guaranteed you that's how I would behave. And that would be a miserable existence. And it is. Being UD/UF definitely is a miserable existence. But that's why UD/UF, again, it's not a permanent state of mind. Remember, UD/UF people are looking for 3 times, They're looking for 2 times their shadow origin. So for me, that would be 2XR, 1XS. So I'm looking for 2 times reverence and 1 time satisfaction. And if I was UDSF, it would actually be 2XS and then 1XR, right? Well, guess what? It's the same thing for SDUF. 2XS, 1XR. And then for SDSF, it is 3X on the satisfaction, okay? So as you can see, based on this pattern that is there in terms of where the cognitive origins are being, sought after, from a despair perspective. Let me adjust my face on the screen so you guys can actually see appropriately. So this is ultimately what people are getting out of having when it comes to, their octograms, right? So this is just the basic foundation that you need to understand with how to interpret octogram behaviors. It's important to know the difference between an introverted piece and an extroverted piece when it comes to the spokes of these 2 wheels in terms of the octogram. And I have my ego wheel and I have my shadow wheel. The shadow wheel also includes my superego, but this is ultimately my shadow wheel. My superego's approach to my shadow wheel is an SDSF. So my superego takes great joy in causing harm to other people, basically. When it makes fun of them, when it mocks them, basically. It loves doing it. It loves, just like the Joker from The Dark Knight, it loves to dance over their corpses, okay? So my joy I'm only able to draw joy. My sense of joy ends up coming from my superego as a primary source, even though it should actually be my subconscious, because my subconscious and my ego are both SDSF. They are the opposite of your ego will and your shadow will. And your shadow will always matches your ego will, whereas your subconscious and your superego, their wheels always match, whether or not they are UDUF, SDUF, UDSF, SDSF, etc., right? So, yeah. So, again, this is all the stuff that you need to know in order to basically understand what I'm presenting here. So, the cognitive mechanics within our psyches, for example, axis, orbit, reflection, correlate with the relationship between the aspects of the temporal wheels. The temporal wheels are still subject to the deeper logic of how our minds operate. So what is cognitive development exactly? So, cognitive development represents not only where you have been, which is your total life experience, your internal introverted sensing as a person, whether or not you're an SI user or not, but the tools that you had to develop in order to adapt to your environment as a child and potentially adolescent, okay? So the development poles of the octagram, which is the shadow pole and the aspiration pole, show specifically how, in our childhood, we responded to our environment and what tools we learned to rely on to move forward in our life. Like, for example, I have this I have this rule, for example, no UD, UF, ISFPs allowed in my life, or at least allowed around my children. I learned recently that UD, UF, ISFPs, like, for example, I was molested by a UD, UF, ISFP, and I had the opportunity of getting close to a UD, UF, ISFP woman in my life. And it was a really rough time. There was, some betrayal. There was some issues that happened. It was kind of a sad situation, but it is what it is. Life happens. We all move on. It's okay, And everyone has the opportunity to learn and grow. But within the context of that situation, I ended up coming to an one second. Hopefully I did not lose the stream there. All right, cool. That's good. Glad I did not lose the stream. That could have been rough. All right, cool. Anyway, the point is that I'm trying to make is that, for example, UDUF ISFPs are the destroyers of innocence, because from their perspective as a child, they have had their innocence taken away from them, and because they're not allowed to be innocent, nobody else is allowed to be innocent. Why is that? Well, that is INTP superego, because, and UDUF is really superego focused. I know that Chris and I were really shying away from that recently and saying that it is not a superego focus, but as of right now, I am issuing a retraction. Okay, we do consider it superego focus. And I would like to thank Fib specifically for pointing that out to us while we were redoing the Octagrid. Because, basically just looking at the data and the numbers, how everything fit within the Octagrid, absolutely it is super ego focus. Super ego focus is absolutely a thing. And UDUF people are super ego focused. UDUF people struggle actually having relationships with other people because they can really only connect with other people who are just as beat down as they are, beat down by life, that is, beat down with their life experience as they are, basically. And that's why UDUF people typically can only really connect with other UDUF people in general, right? The thing is, though, is that when dealing with UDUF people, you really have to consider the consequences of the situation. However, but if you're in a situation where it's like, okay, you're golden pairs, you're in a relationship, you're both UDUF, just because, you're in that relationship, eventually you'll help each other get to a point where you're basically UDSF. You're able to heal each other from that perspective and from that point of view, which is good. Again, we maintain currently that UDUF as a mind state, as an octagram, is actually a very temporary survival mechanism, okay? And it is not something that is meant to be permanent. The problem is that UDUF people are pretty dangerous in general to other people. This is why they have a really hard time connecting with other people who do not have similar trauma. Because as near as I can tell, UDUF people really can only connect to one another through trauma bonds. Okay? And this is why the trauma bond actually exists. It really exists specifically for UDUF people to get out of being UDUF. The problem is that a UDUF person has been so beat down and is despairing so much in life that they cannot get out of their despair by themselves. They cannot. Now, if someone is UDSF, if there are any of the other three octagrams, they can deal with it. But if a despair person who is UDUF, they really don't have those mental tools to do that, and it's all as a result of their cognitive development, specifically where they came from as a child. So because I have extroverted malevolence with my unconscious development, guess what that meant? That means my entire environment as a child was very malevolent towards me personally. Okay? It also means that no one was a fan of me, okay? And I had to learn how to be a fan of myself in order to survive, because my environment was entirely malevolent to me all the time and extremely disabling to me all the time. Well, even with my shadow will, when you look at my shadow will, I am very externally desecrating other people, even to the point of destroying their ego investments, slaying their sacred cows, even publicly shaming them. Why? Because I was publicly shamed over and over and over as a child by my father. Hell, even my ISFP, UD, molester cousin, woman, girl, she even tried to blackmail me as a child and threatened to tell other people of the abuse, of the sexual abuse between each other when I was like 10 years old, when I was a fifth grader, or a fourth grader, actually. When I was a fourth grader, she did this to me. So I was 10 years old, right? 10 or 11 years old as a fourth grader, okay? And I called her bluff, and I'm like, no, thank you. But it wasn't a bluff. So what she did is then she told everybody about the sexual abuse, and then she blamed me and said I was the one abusing her. And that absolutely destroyed my reputation as a child. It was the absolute highest level of desecration that you could have ever have done to me in my INTJ shadow. And I was already basically unconscious developed as it is, given how malevolent my church was, how malevolent my immediate family was, how malevolent my extended family was, how malevolent everyone at school was to me. And that just made it even worse. Right? This is why I outwardly desecrate other people, because it's literally as a result of that abuse, right? Because I had my ego teared down, so I had to be the only person in my life to puff up my own ego, basically, and be there for my own ego, which was why I'm introverted with my egotism, which is like why I like it when other people stroke my ego, especially when I'm in a sexual relationship with a woman. If she ever desecrates my ego, I instantly do not listen to her. I don't care if she's right. I will just stop. I will stop. I will just dismiss her immediately. Tune her out. Don't care what she has to say. She could be right. I don't care. I will not listen to her at all, because I have to be the only one there to watch out for my own ego, okay? That's like a huge issue. It's a huge issue for me, okay? And that's a thing. So please be aware of that. Please be aware of these consequences of cognitive development from children. This is given to the point where, like, the UDUF octagram, in my opinion, is entirely unnatural. It is an unnatural octagram. Okay, it's just there as a survival mechanism, and it is meant to be healed out of. But you can't heal yourself out of it by yourself, because you're despairing too much that you just kind of give up, right? You need somebody else to be there with you, who actually understands the trauma, maybe even shares in the same trauma as you, to help you get out of that trauma. That way that you can grow out of that trauma together, because human beings are built for a relationship, and this is how it is. So whenever people, like, for example, my ex, Andy Andrea, likes to tell me that, I'm a shit person because I had trauma bonds. She literally told me that to my face. I'm a shit person because I have trauma bonds in my life, right? And it's like, okay, well, I mean, no thank you. You may be this decaying SDUF person, but I don't want to have anything to do with you. No thanks. Like, you're just not going to be there for me, right? This is why in my life, I've only met 3 INTJ women who are UDUF. Only 3. It's because they're just so rare. INTJ women are already 0.25% of the population as is, and then the UDUF ones of those are even rarer. So it's like, okay, it's like, I'm looking at like one in many thousands of possible people is potentially, my golden pair that is compatible with me from a nature and a nurtural perspective. You see what I'm saying? It ends up becoming like a losing battle after a while, and then you just either give up and give in to despair, or you just keep going, right? That's just kind of how it works. So anyway, from It's really difficult. So one more time, though. The development poles of the octagram show specifically how, in our childhood, we responded to our environment and what tools we learned to rely on and move forward in our life. So the poles we develop into, which is the shadow and aspiration pole, and for me that is malevolence and fanaticism in my ego, and desecration and egotism within my shadow. They're the same as the sides of the mind we learn to rely on to adapt to our circumstances. So for atypicals, which is SDSF and UDUF, the development pole, SD or UD, reveals which pole they spend on others, while the other side pole determines which they spend on themselves. So for example, unconscious developed types express their shadow pole in a giving way, but their aspirational pole in a receiving, spend on my own self way. Okay, so for example, fanaticism towards myself, malevolence towards other people, right? Whereas subconscious developed types express their aspirational pole in a giving way, but their shadow pole in a receiving, spend on self way. So for example, an SDSF ENTP, right? So like Fib, he's on the live stream with us this evening. Thank you, Fib, for being our example this evening. He is SDSF. So all of these would be switched, basically. So from that perspective, that would literally mean that his introversion and his extroversion would be completely flipped, right? Completely flipped. Using the whiteboard here. Completely flipped. So he is very external with compassion. Why? Because he's received a lot of compassion by his environment. So he is externally compassionate to other people, but he is internal with his envy. He likes to receive envy from others. He likes it when other people are envious of him. Such that, he can't, if a woman is being in a relationship with him, she needs to be envious of him, basically. He is very external with his fanaticism. He is a fan of other people, but he is very malevolent towards himself. And sometimes, he needs someone else to be malevolent to him to take him down a couple of notches in order to teach him harsh lessons in his life that he can grow from, because he wants and seeks out those harsh lessons. He ends up seeking out pain. It's almost to a form of masochism if you think about it. But because as a result of that masochistic malevolence that he has towards his own self, that he also likes to receive from other people, it makes him stronger, because he's always questioning to himself that, have I literally had everything handed to me on a silver platter? Did I eat from the silver spoon? Do I even have any substance? And he is questioning whether or not he has enough substance and whether or not he has enough life lessons, or if he's just entirely going to be enabled, right? Same thing goes with desecration or egotism. He actually goes out of his way to stroke the egos of others, but he ends up desecrating himself, right? He's always taking himself down a few notches, while building up the egos of people around him, right? He's very external with his modesty. He likes to be around modest people. And then he ends up being, internal to his vainglory, and he likes to receive vainglory. So he likes to be the one that sticks out from all of the modest people. That's what SDSF looks like from an ENTP perspective, okay? And that's what's literally happening here. One more time. Unconscious developed types express their shadow pole in a giving way, but their aspirational pole in a receiving way, okay? Subconscious developed types express their aspirational pole in a giving way, but their shadow pole in a receiving, spend on self way, okay? That's literally how it works. So we've been making this all about me, so let's actually talk about the other temples real quick, okay? So development in the soul temple. So for example, subconscious developed ENFPs and ISTJs use their subconscious or aspirational pole of impartiality externally, giving impartiality to other people. They are impartial on behalf and to others because they are subconscious developed. However, they use their shadow pole on themselves, meaning they discriminate for, and also means showing favoritism, and sometimes against themselves. So they end up showing they don't do themselves any favors. They'd rather give favors to others to a point. Unconscious developed ENFPs and ISTJs use their unconscious shadow pole of discrimination on others, playing favorites or being partial towards someone they dislike. But they use their impartiality poles on themselves. So they'll play favorites towards their affiliates and people in their life, but then they will be entirely impartial towards themselves. Subconscious developed ESTPs and INFJs use their aspiration pull of objectification on others, so they objectify others, objectifying externally while they idealize and even idolize themselves. Whereas unconscious developed ESTPs and INFJs idealize other people but end up objectifying themselves. And that's where you end up getting ESTPs and INFJs treating themselves like an object. There is an INFJ woman, for example, in the Ego Hacker Discord. Her name is Stephanie. We call her Steffi. And Steffi absolutely idealizes everyone else around her, but she constantly objectifies herself. She treats herself like an object. She's really liked receiving from other people in her life, treating her like an object, okay? And the reason why this happens is that objectification is linked to extroverted sensing. It's the performance cog, basically, of the tempo wheel for the ESTP and the INFJs in trying to reach intimacy and connect in this origin. Because from their perspective, if I'm the most efficient performer, and to be an efficient performer, and when they're objectifying themselves, they treat themselves like a machine. They treat themselves like an object, because the more efficiency they have to have the absolute best performance ever, the more of their humanity they have to lose. And they're willing to sacrifice their humanity to turn themselves into an object of performance. That is internal objectification. Okay? This is why someone like Steffi has decided in her life, to have the profession that she had. Which was specifically based on that introverted objectification, okay? And that's how bad it can get for an INFJ who is unconscious developed if you're not paying attention, okay? So let's look at heart temple, okay? Because heart temple is the shadow, and we've talked a bit about heart temple using myself as an example, okay? So subconscious developed ENTPs and ISFJs use their aspirational pull of fanaticism on others, and they become fans of others or something external. It could be a noun, person, place, or thing. And while they are malevolent, often punishing to themselves, they often feel unworthy when compared to whatever their fanaticism is directed toward. Unconscious developed ENTPs and ISFJs, like myself, use their malevolence on others, but are fanatical about themselves. Being fans of themselves is the way they cope with exposing others to the pain of the world, believing that they are ultimately helping them, right? And then subconscious developed ESFPs and INTJs, okay, now going to the other side. So now we're at the Heart Temple Wayfarers instead of Heart Temple Crusaders, right? Use their aspirational pull of egotism on others, puffing up other people's egos, etc., while they spend their desecration pull on themselves. They think their ego is too inflated, so they desecrate themselves and reduce their ego. I actually have the opportunity of knowing an INTJ who is UDUF and watching them desecrate their own ego is absolutely fascinating to me. Absolutely fascinating to me. It's just oh, my effie child's like, oh, no, it's okay. Like that kind of a thing, but even though and it's hard and it's nice because then my effie child gets to stop being sacrificed or being fed to my demon. Then my effie child can be there for this other person, who's hurting. And then I see them desecrating themselves and I'm trying to tell them, no, you don't have to do that. It's okay. You see what I'm saying? And that's an aspect of the healing process of bringing me out of UDUF to UDSF as a result of me knowing this UDUF INTJ in my life, specifically because of how we interact with each other. It's pretty cool. And then unconscious developed ESFPs and INTJs spend their desecration on others, but spend their egotism on themselves. They view it as an achievement to destroy the perceived sacred cows and ego investments of other people. This is like, for example, my former co-host Jab. He is Mr. Desecration. That's exactly how he lives his life. Let's move on to Mind Temple. Are you guys tracking here? Are you guys paying attention? It needs to, get in there. Seriously, pay attention, guys. All right, cool. Welcome, Genu, to the thing. So, Mind Temple, right? So, Mind Temple people are going for cognitive origin authority and the cognitive origin of validation. So, let's look at subconscious developed ESTJs and INFPs. They use their credulity on others, but manifestation on themselves. They accept the rules of their environment to be empowered to manifest what they seek. That's basically what they do. Unconscious developed ESTJs and INFPs use their manifestation on others and try to create a better future, a better vision for others, but are very credulous on themselves, which means they really hella rely on their own credentials and their own achievements to a point. And they very much love receiving those credentials from others and receiving credulity from others, which means they like it when other people just use them as their source, as their cited source, and only use them as their sole cited source, right? That is introverted credulity. That's what that means, right? Extroverted manifestation is basically helping other people manifest things and have, a better future or make their dreams come true, right? And they do that in exchange for receiving credulity from other people. Subconscious developed ENFJs and ISTPs use their obstinance on others but accommodate themselves. They spend all of their accommodation on themselves and they only give obstinance to other people. This sounds like Scaredy Cat on the Ego Hackers Discord, right? Very, very obstinate towards others and always accommodating herself and making accommodation towards herself. Great. But then there's the unconscious developed ENFJs and ISTPs using their accommodation for others. And they're very accommodating to others, even to the point of facilitating other people's relationships. But they're obstinate on themselves. By being helpful to the others, they are more obstinate with themselves and flexibility for other or less inflexible to their self. So they're pretty flexible for other people, but they are not flexible themselves. Unconscious developed ENFJs have to be careful because this is what causes them to put other people above them and other people above their own immediate family. And this can actually lead to abusive behavior from unconscious developed ENFJs because they're placing other people who are not even their immediate family above themselves. This is literally what Railgun's ENFJ father did to her. This is also what my ENFJ father did to me, and this contributed to both me and Railgun becoming unconscious developed as ETPs because we were basically neglected, right? And because she was hella neglected, then she ends up neglecting other people in her life because of the neglect that she received from her own father and also from her mother, but especially, from her own father. And this is a situation when you are becoming a victim of abuse, you are at risk of being abusive to other people. And that is always something you have to watch out, especially with unconscious developed people. I'm not saying subconscious developed people are better. I am not saying that. You could actually argue that unconscious developed people are very wise and very mature compared to most people. But the thing is, when it comes to UDUF, that maturity ends up costing like almost way too much that we actually end up losing ourselves in the process. It is entirely rough, okay? And then, and then let's move on to the body temple. All right, let's see. You guys still tracking? You guys still tracking? Okay. All right. Okay. So, body temple. All right. So in the body temple, for example, subconscious developed ESFJs and INTPs use their servility on others, so they end up serving others, but they're very hedonistic towards themselves. They spend their service on others, but cultivate pleasure and curiosity in themselves. So they spend all their hedonism on themselves, basically, and this can cause subconsciously developed ESFJs to be very covert contracted. It's like, hey, I serve you, and because I serve you these things, that means I get to go to the store and buy myself whatever I want, or I get to go out to the club with my friends whenever I want because I did all these great things for you. It becomes a covert contract. And ESFJs and INTPs who are subconscious developed do this all the time. Unconscious developed ESFJs and INTPs use their hedonism on others, but servility on themselves, where they basically will serve themselves and they'll serve nobody, but then they'll facilitate hedonistic behaviors with other people. And it's like, okay, hey, let's go get blackout drunk, or hey, let's go snort some lines of cocaine, or hey, let's go to the club, let's go bang a couple of girls together, let's get some whores together, and they will facilitate the hedonism, right? But then they will spend all of their service on themselves and not serve anyone other than themselves. They cultivate curiosity and pleasure in others, but they spend their service on themselves. That's what that means. Whereas subconscious developed ENTJs and ISFPs use their complacency on others but subjugate themselves. They understand that other people are naive. They like being around other naive people, basically, and that can be pretty difficult. And then the subjugation of themselves, it's like they understand that they have to have self-control from that perspective. Whereas unconscious developed ENTJs and ISFPs use their subjugation on others. They are trying to subjugate and control other people and enslave other people. But while they do that, they allow themselves to be entirely naive. They allow themselves, hey, as long as I control you, that means I get to be naive sometimes because I have control over you and I'm controlling you for your own good. Again, subconscious developed, the other side is they allow other people to be naive, but they are overly controlling and subjugating themselves, basically, as a result. And that is essentially, basically, all of the differences, within the sake of this model, okay? So, yeah. Great. So that, in a nutshell, is what cognitive development actually is. Do you guys have any questions relating to cognitive development right now? Jay Patel asks, could you explain the difference between receiving to self versus giving to self? Yeah, giving to self means I'm giving to me, right? And then receiving to self means it's what other people have given to me over time. So receiving to self equals what other people have given to me, whether I wanted it or not, right? Whether I've wanted it or not, so that when you give to others, you're giving to other people whether you've wanted it or not. Because remember something that's very critical, and I'll use red ink for this. All this is right here, folks, it is one thing and one thing only. Cognitive projection. That's all it is. Cognitive projection. Okay? Cognitive projection. So, if you want to, avoid that a little bit, just understand cognitive projection. Okay? And that's literally how our human nurture works. It is just cognitive projection. Okay? You, in your adulthood, you are using your cognitive development to serve up to others what everyone else in your childhood forced down your throat, basically. And that's why it is extroverted, right? And things are introverted, what you never got when you were a child. And you have to give it to yourself just for you to live with yourself later in your life. That's what that means, okay? Literally, that's what that means, all right? Cool. That was an excellent question, Jay Patel. Thank you for asking. You've always have such great questions for this, especially when we get on private calls. That's also a lot of fun as well. So yeah. Yeah, thank you for your kind words, Fib. Dren Cross asks, how plausible is changing one's development from UD to SD? Like I said, it depends on how much life experience you have. The younger you are, basically the younger you are, the easier it is potentially for you to change your cognitive development, especially during your childhood. If you're no longer in your childhood and you're in your adolescence, it's basically too late for you. And the only thing that could change your really cognitive development would be physical trauma to your brain, for the most part. I have not really seen or heard of anyone else changing their cognitive development as a result of that. Excellent question, Dren Cross. Does anyone else have any other questions relating to what has been talked about in this lecture today? Anyone else? Okay. Well, it looks like we are done with questions, which is pretty cool. So, all right. Glad we were able to have this lecture and discuss cognitive development. The next episode that we'll be discussing in season 18 will be related to cognitive focus, where we will actually be able to complete this entire octagram-based dichotomy, so you guys can understand just fundamentally how octagram works. So yeah, and that's where it comes there. Differences between subconscious developed and unconscious developed INFP. I already explained that. I literally already explained that. Just watch the stream and go back, okay? It's basically using credulity on others, but using manifestation for themselves is subconscious developed, and then using manifestation on others, but being credulous themselves, that is the unconscious developed for the INFP, all right? So please go back in time and watch that a little bit. If you have more questions about that, Felice, please bring that up inside of the Ego Hackers Discord, discord.gg/Ego Hackers. Please join it and then also take it to the Discuss Octagram channel where we can have this discussion. And anyone will be able to assist you there and have a discussion with you about that. Differences between a subconscious developed and unconscious developed INFP. So anyway, folks, thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys on the next episode next month for our live lecture for Season 18, Cognitive Mechanics. See y'all later. Good night.